What's up, everybody? Kasabe here with an end of the season update, end of the regular season. Postseason will be starting here pretty soon. First of all, thank you to those who have watched the franchise up to this point. I have simmed 162 games of Oklahoma City Lightning baseball. Unfortunately, they did not make the playoffs. Just a brief little recap here. Finished the season 76-86, which isn't terrible, but worse than the division, unfortunately. They did end the season on a 6-game win streak, so that was fun to see. But as you can see here by the wild card, finished 9 games out. I do want to give some props to a couple of the players on the team, and first I'm going to advance the day so you can kind of see. So, first, we go to the awards. Mickey Stern was acquired back in August and got a Gold Glove award, so nice to see you there. That's about it for the awards. We do have a few league leaders as well. Gordon Landry led the league in stolen bases and hits. Landry was also a mid-season acquisition by the Lightning. I think I got him pretty early on in May, but he was a firecracker for the team. Was constantly getting hits, stealing bases on like the first or second pitch, so very good guy to have at the top of the lineup. As we look at some of the rest of the league leaders here, there's Landry with 200 hits, led both leagues, the entire MLB, in 678 at-bats. There is Landry with stolen bases. He did get caught stealing quite a bit too, 17 times, so 42 out of 59 attempts. Going to the rest of the lineup here, Matt Davis was probably the best offensive player in terms of like home runs and RBI. Landry was the best at getting on base. Davis was the best at getting people off the bases and scoring. So 37 home runs for Davis, 84 RBIs. There were a couple players that underperformed, so Logan Wagner was my backup catcher, stuck him at first base after some injuries. Reed Fortenberry really struggled to start the season, was down in the 210s for his average, got back up into 266, so a decent season all things considered. Jeremy Finch, I'll go back up here, pretty solid second in the lineup guy. Again, just kind of an average season. We go down here. White was hurt for a little bit. Patterson didn't play all the way through. And disappointing Marshall Gilchrist. He's a lefty specialist. His season average was under 200. Made a few trades to change things up in the lineup here throughout the year. Didn't quite work out. Team was above 500 for only a few games this season, but most of the time they were at 500 or below. So even the roster moves I tried to make did not end up helping out the team. Pitching was fairly solid. You'll look here, a lot of pitchers had 10-loss seasons. The best in terms of win-loss was Mitch Zimmerman, had 11 wins. But he and Aiden Patton I also got midway through the season, so that's kind of skewed right there. ERAs, they're in the mid-3s to low 4s. I mean, that's acceptable for starting pitchers. As far as the bullpen goes, some solid numbers here. Stewart with a 2.23. Got ERAs in the 3s. Smart was the highest in the bullpen. DJ Ryan was on fire to start the year. Had like 20 or 25 saves in a row. Finished the season with 41, but did blow a couple saves. Lost quite a few games in clutch situations. And his ERA went from below 1 to about the 3 mark. I really can't pinpoint any blame on any of the pitching though. Like, yeah, he did blow a few saves, but like it's not like he lost the game. All the losses he had were in close games where they had to stick him in the 10th or 11th innings. He didn't blow the save and the lead except for I think one time. So yeah, pitching was okay. There were a lot of low scoring games, and I just wish the offense would have done a little bit more for the rest of the team. So that was just a brief little recap on the Oklahoma City Lightning, and we move into the playoff bracket here. So first I'll start with the division that the Lightning were in, the National League Central. Michigan Moose won that division at 92-70, followed by the Dallas Dragons at the wild card, 91-71. I talked about it a lot on Twitter the last couple weeks of the season, but Dallas was in a free fall, losing 12 games in a row, including a few to end the season against Oklahoma City. They led the division for, I bet, probably close to 140 or 150 games out of the 162 game season. think San Antonio was vying with them for a while. Michigan was a good team throughout the year. I think they kind of turned it on a little bit towards the end of the year, but they finally overtook Dallas, and now Dallas, losing 12 straight, has a one-game take-all to see if they even make it past the wild card round. We'll take a look at a couple of their pitching rotations. So Will Palmer, I think it said, was in the lead for the Cy Young candidacy. 17-11. I mean, his win-loss isn't great. Pitched a ton of innings. Good strikeout numbers. So I think that's eventually what's going to win him the Cy Young. But the rest of the team, pretty good pitching seasons as well. Rich Parker with a 2.38 ERA. Seth Clark led the league in saves. I think he had 51 to end the season. So that combination for the Moose, they were a top 5 pitching team and ultimately led them to the division title. Now I go back to Dallas. Dallas had quite a few pitching Cy Young contenders too. Ethan Kinsler finished with a 12-7 win-loss record, but you look there, 2.06 ERA, .98 WHIP, and also had 280 strikeouts. Sadly, he could not get the job done, as well as Grant Murphy in the final 2 games of the season versus Oklahoma City. They still end up losing those games and falling to the wild card. So you get a look there at Murphy's stats. Dallas was another solid pitching team. They also had a little bit of better hitters, I would say. Roland here with 36 home runs, 98 RBIs, led the team. Julius Collins right about the same. So Dallas was, I think, the best team in the league, not just the division, the league, for the first 40 or 50 games of the season by a long shot. But I went back in the schedule and looked. They went 7-18 in the month of September to lose the division, and that did them in. National League East wasn't very competitive. The Blues, who are ranked 26th in total team attributes, took that division at 85-77. As you see there, they're very good at hitting, contact, and power. Get a look here at the Blues. Paul Keyes, 35 home runs, 114 RBI, 324 average, led the way for them. And finally, in the National League West, we have the Dinos, the Death Valley Dinos, with 95 wins. That's good enough for best in the National League, followed by the Sacramento Raiders. Raiders were in contention with the wild card with about 3 or 4 other teams, but they actually beat the Michigan Moose 3 out of 4 to end their season to clinch themselves the wild card spot. So they will play Dallas, and the winner of that will play the Death Valley Dinos. Looking at the Death Valley Dinos, they don't really have anybody who led the team as their team MVP. They were just pretty solid across the board. So you see here Casey Lumpkin, 23 homers, 90 RBI. Richards about the same. Quintero about the same. Peterson also had a good season. So these guys were just, a force to be reckoned with up and down the lineup, as opposed to relying on one specific player. Taking a quick look at the Sacramento Raiders pitching rotation, I see a couple of good starters, which they might have to rely pretty heavily on these 3 guys right here to lead them through the playoffs if they intend on making a run. So Marty Stark, Tadahito Takatsu, and Max McLean were their best pitchers. You see there, all of their ERAs were about 3.2 or lower. From there, the rotation kind of drops off. So you got Wilson Aaron, ERA in the 4s. If they really need it, Josh Hansen, ERA of 6. And the middle of their bullpen, not great. Their closers and setup guys, decent overalls. They had good seasons, but Seth Jackson with a 7.16 ERA didn't pitch very long in the season, so that number might be kind of skewed for the 30 innings that he pitched. You never know. They might just have a playoff run where everybody goes off on the pitching side. And looking at the Raiders lineup, really their best player was Peter Wynn Jr., the shortstop, batting cleanup. 25 home runs, 90 RBI. Everybody else is just kind of a serviceable veteran. As you see here, a lot of players with 15-ish home runs, 50 to 60 RBI. So not a great lineup, but enough where they can get the job done if they need to, or if everybody just kind of gets on a bit of a hot streak. So you get a look there at the playoff bracket in the National League once again. Death Valley was the top seed. They'll play the winner of the Dragons and the Raiders. And then you got Nashville versus Michigan, the Moose versus the Blues in the 2v3 matchup. I personally will be very intrigued at the wild card matchup between the Dragons and the Raiders. The Raiders are on a hot streak. Dragons are not. And will the Dragons be able to piece it together, go back to a couple of their Cy Young candidates to try and get them the win? Remains to be seen. All right, we head to the American League here in the standings. Starting with the American League East, the Pennsylvania Musketeers won their division at 93-69, followed closely by the Maine Lookouts. They finished 89-73 and got the first wild card spot. Pennsylvania was led by Buck Shauver, the pitcher. Their ace went 19-5 with a 2.63 ERA, 240 strikeouts. Musketeers also had a fairly solid lineup up and down, kind of like the Death Valley Dinos. At least the first 6 guys in their lineup were forces to be reckoned with. Hunter White, Eddie Flores, and J.C. Ray with high contact numbers, and then Brock Shepard and Zach Lamb hitting those guys in with close to 30 home runs and 100 RBI. Tyson Decker, also guy to fit in that bunch, starts to drop off a bit of a cliff here at the end. Not sure if they had any injuries that they had to deal with, but they also have a couple of what looks like platoon guys with the weak bench. And then James Cousins, 289 average in the 9th spot. He's kind of like your second leadoff hitter for the Musketeers. We go to Maine. They are a primarily offensive team. So you look at their lineup as well. King hitter, aptly named with 30 home runs on the season, Bo Sorensen. Also a good power hitter, maybe a little bit less home runs than most people would anticipate with those power attributes, but nonetheless, Maine is in the playoffs. Go to Maine's pitching. They were about like Oklahoma City's ERAs in the mid 3s to low 4s. Not a designated ace, I would say, on this team. A lot of their pitchers were just kind of so-so with average win-losses, but their closer, Nick Montgomery, ended the season very well with 47 saves. He was one of the top saves getters in the American League. I guess it helps to have a closer like him to close the door in close games if your starting pitcher couldn't dominate the rest of the game. In the American League Central Division, the South Dakota Bears won that very handily. Not even a team within 15 games of the Bears, so they won that division pretty early on. Getting a look at the South Dakota Bears pitching rotation, and this one is quite the outlier. J.P. Powers, 13-13 record, but a 1.87 ERA. I don't know how he didn't win more games. I guess the team just didn't want to bat for him in those games. Meanwhile, Brandon Watson, ERA above 4, or just above 4, I should say, went 17-9. Don't quite understand that. I believe Dale Wolf led the league in saves, as you see here, 54 on the season. I think that tops both leagues. So 54 was the top saves amount in either side of the league. And finally, we go to the American League West. So the Mounties, they won by a half game, which technically they won by a game, but the Las Vegas Kings beat the Salt Lake Outlaws in game 163 for that final wild card spot. So this division was very close-knit with the exception of the Pioneers. Even Alaska, the Drillers, were only a few games behind to end the season, but nonetheless, the Kings beat the Outlaws 9-4 in game 163, so they will play the Maine Lookouts for the wild card. Get a look here at the Vancouver Mounties pitching rotation. Again, nothing too out of the ordinary. Emilio Rosales probably had the best season for the Mounties, 16-7 record, ERA in the low 3s. Hector Lopez was a good closer for them. He had 47 saves for the Mounties. And then for the Kings, their top ace was Tom Shields, who did not pitch in the wild card game, but nonetheless, the Kings were able to move on. Tyler Elliott is one of the best rated players in this entire franchise. I think he was hurt for some of the season. He only had 34 saves, so the Kings pitching looks a lot better on paper, on the standings and attributes, than what shows here, but I think they had to deal with some injuries throughout the season and were still able to make the playoffs. So they are a dark horse, I believe, with their pitching staff to perhaps make it pretty far in the playoffs. It just depends on that one wild card game. As you get a look here at the final playoff bracket again, in the American League, you have South Dakota, which led the AL with 93 wins. They play the winner of Las Vegas and Maine. And meanwhile, the other matchup, the 2v3, will be the Vancouver Mounties versus the Pennsylvania Musketeers. I must say, this season was very, very competitive. A lot of teams with decent amount of wins, but not one team that was overpowered over the others. So again, I think the best teams so far in this franchise were the Dinos, who had the most wins to finish the season, and the Dallas Dragons, who are in the wild card game now, but for a good while were way above everybody else in the win-loss department. They lost 12 games in a row, finished with 91, but you see here you have some teams that made the playoffs with 85 wins, and the best of the best only had 95. Kind of glossed over the awards a little bit earlier too, so Michael Mayfield for the Armadillos, they were just a few games short of making the playoffs, but he had the best season in the National League, won the most valuable player. Clinton Lake for the Hitmen, these guys were in last place below the Lightning for a majority of the season. They just really turned it on in late August and early September, so I think Lake's stats really were padded right around then. He'll finish second, right about the same stats as Mayfield, just the batting average is 26 points lower. In the Cy Young race, Will Palmer beat out the two Dallas Dragons pitchers to win that award. And in the American League, the most valuable player race is the same as the Cy Young race. So pitchers really went off in that league with ERAs below 3, 20-win season for Cole Robertson, and all of these guys had quite a good amount of strikeouts. So Carolina Reapers with the most valuable player and Cy Young on their team, but they could not make the playoffs. Looking for some good competitive baseball here in the playoffs. Let me know if there is anybody that you're rooting for or believe will take home the crown. A few more weeks of streaming here to finish off this 30-team custom franchise. Thanks for watching, and we'll see how the season plays out.